Okay, good morning to everybody in Israel. Good night to everybody in America. Baruch Hashem, this is our 300th class that's going to be going on YouTube, which is great. And Baruch Hashem, the subscribers are growing. The number of students are growing who are connecting. I'm receiving emails and feedback from people across the world. So it's very humbling. And B'ezrat Hashem, we'll be able to touch more and more people's lives in a real way. Both individually and collectively. Hoping to be able to finish the 8th lesson tonight. So, B'ezrat Hashem, moving forward, hopefully later this week, we'll start the next lesson, L'Kutei Moharan, which is an amazing lesson. And hopefully we're going to be able to take something tonight or today, depending on where you are, that's real and genuine, something that you can bring with you into your Avodat Hashem and into your personal life. And hopefully it could fill those lackings that we're all feeling so much right now. There's a lot of people struggling in the world. There's a lot of tragedies that have taken place recently between Meron, some of the things that have happened in Israel, the building that fell in Florida. It's a difficult time. And we really need to come together and to support each other to get through these times. And not to see each other as separate entities with which we need to compete or one up, but to understand that we're really, like the Baal Tanya says, different parts of one spiritual body. Some of their head, some of the hands, some of the feet, some is the heart. And we all need each other. So, B'ezrat Hashem, it's in these times that we really have to pull together and to love each other. And the best thing that we can do for one another, says Rabbi Nachman, is to teach people about Da'at, how to know Hashem, especially in these times. There was a class, I think, that Gedalia Fenster, he reposted the class that I did with him on Facebook. So if anybody hasn't seen that yet, you should get a chance to look at it. I guess he felt that specifically right now, this is a time that people can get chizuk and encouragement from that class. So check that out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a story of Rabbi Bar Bar Chana in the Gemara. And Rabbi Nachman, like his unique, amazing way of showing how his entire intricate tapestry of a lesson is going to come together in this Gemara, which is actually quite mysterious, like many of the Gemaras that he cites. But in truth, he's going to show how this Gemara alludes to all the different things that we've learned in the lesson so far. So let's start. This is the explanation. Amar Rabbi Bar Bar Chana. Amar li Ahutaya. A merchant said to me, Ta b'achavei lach matei midbar. Come, I'm going to show you the dead of the desert. So what is this referring to? The generation which left Mitzrayim, that left slavery behind, that left suffering behind, that left exile after 210 years, they were taken into a midbar, they were taken into a desert prior to entering the land of Israel. Now, according to Chazal, the sages, if those people would have had full faith in Moshe Rabbeinu, and they would have had full faith in Hashem, they would have made it into Israel within 3 days. But because they lacked faith, they were constantly complaining about lackings of food and drink. They were constantly questioning Moshe about why he took them out of Mitzrayim and romanticizing about how things were better then. And as a result of that, and specifically what we're in the period right now of mourning, these 3 weeks of mourning that the Jewish people are going through, which is going to culminate in Tisha B'Av, the day in which the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, that all started in the generation of the desert. That because we were crying for no reason, the Torah says, or at least not a good reason. So now every year, we have a day in which we have a reason to cry, which is that we have the loss of the home of Hashem. And if somebody doesn't feel like that relates to them, that resonates to them, or who really cares, so you need to know that all of your lackings come from the destruction of that building, because the Beit HaMikdash destruction is your destruction, it's my destruction. That the reason why we have illness is because that building, that home is destroyed. The reason why we have depression and anxieties because that building is destroyed. The reason why we feel lacking and we feel lonely is because that building is not here. So all of that happened because of this generation in the desert. Now, interestingly, the Arizal teaches that in the final generation before the coming of Mashiach, that entire generation of Jewish people which passed away in the desert and didn't make it into the land of Israel, only their children did, that they are going to be reincarnated. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Torah speaks about this inyan, this concept of reincarnation, that Jewish souls and souls in general are constantly going through the process of reincarnation in order to achieve complete rectification or wholeness in the place of their souls lacking. And therefore, according to all the Kabbalists, most of the souls that are in this world now are old souls. And that means that we've been here many times before, not just once. And one of those times, the Arizal teaches, is when we were all in the desert, and that we were all part of that generation, and specifically the generation which is going to precede the coming of Mashiach, which all of the sages now say that we're in. So we are that generation, the Arizal teaches, that's in the desert. So this midrash is, or this Gemara is really about us. Come and I'm going to show you the generation that died in the desert. Azli v'chazetidnu. I went and saw them. V'damu kaman dimvasmu. They look like drunkards. So what does the Rashbam explain? It says that they were laying there, like when you get too drunk, and then all of a sudden your face gets flush, and you lay down, like people who drink too much wine, the Rashbam says. So we saw a whole group of people laying down, passed out, drunk, with flushed faces, like people who drink too much wine. Viganu aparkid. They were lying down on their back, and they had their knees, they were raised up. Zakifa birke dahad minayu. One of them had their knee raised up. Va'alei taya tute birke. And the merchant went under his knee. Ki rakiv gamla, because he was riding on his camel. It was a kifa rumcha, and he took his spear and he held it up. Velo nagabe, and he wasn't able to touch the leg. So just for anyone right now who's watching and you want to understand what's happening, there's a group of people who are lying down, apparently drunk, with their faces flushed, somewhat unconscious. These are all apparently the souls from the generation of the desert. This is what the merchant is pointing out. And one of their knees is lifted up. So the merchant has a spear, and he's riding on his horse under that person's knee. And even though he's holding his spear up, it doesn't reach that person's knee. It doesn't reach his leg. Paske chada karna ditechelta dahad minayhu velo have mistageh. I cut off a corner from his tzitzit, and afterwards we weren't able to leave. Amarli said to me, Dilma shakalt midei minayu. We have a tradition. Did you perhaps take something from one of them? Digamire, because we have learned the man de shakil midei minayu lo mistagele. Anyone who takes something from them cannot depart. Azli ahadarte vadar mistagelan. So I went and put the corner of the tzitzit back. Then we were able to leave. So this is a very mysterious, enigmatic story from Bava Batra. That's on Daf 73, Amud Bet. And now Rabbi Nachman is going to explain everything that we've been learning for like the past month about this lesson 8, whether it's the Ruach Chaim, our lackings that come from a lack of Ruach, the concept of breathing, the concept of connection and attachment to the tzaddik, where all Ruach comes from, the concept of overcoming and avoiding that force, the Rav of the Klipa, the Rav of the husks, the Rav of the other side, where people can nourish their energy from if they're not getting it from the tzaddik. So all of these we're going to learn is alluded to in this story. And Rabbi Nachman explains the story like this. Come, I'm going to show you the dead in the desert. Rabbi Nachman says, Hainu, meaning, come, I'm going to show you how these people who are very far from Hashem, they don't have attachment to tzaddikim. And it's for that reason that they're called dead in the desert. Because the Gemara says that who's a person who has everything? A person who has da'at, a person who knows Hashem, a person who feels close to Hashem, a person who experiences Hashem in their life. So what would be the opposite of that? It wouldn't be a tzaddik, it would be a rasha. So who are these rashaim that are in the desert? They are these people that they don't know Hashem. And why don't they know Hashem? Therefore, they're called dead. Because they're not close to tzaddikim. Because it says in the Gemara that for the 40 years that the Jewish people were in the desert, the northern wind didn't blow there, meaning that there's an intense lacking. Because when you learn this Gemara, this was the reason that they weren't able to have the Brit Milah in the desert, which is very interesting, because there's so many ramifications of the mitzvah of the Brit Milah, how important this mitzvah is, how according to our sages, we didn't do the Brit Milah in the desert. And in addition to that, we know that the concept of the Brit, according to the Zohar and according to Rabbi Nachman, is, so to speak, us reaching our spiritual potential. So in the Midbar, we were not reaching our spiritual potential. We weren't able to do the Brit Milah. And what was the reason the sages cited? Because the northern wind wasn't blowing. So now we have a deeper understanding, because what's the northern wind according to Rabbi Nachman? That's the ruach of the tzaddik that fills in all of our lackings. So what does it mean that we weren't able to have the Brit Milah? It means that we didn't have attachment. We didn't have the veku with Moshe Rabbeinu. We didn't believe in Moshe. We didn't attach to Moshe. We didn't have a deep, intimate relationship with him that would allow us to cultivate genuine closeness to Hashem. And as a result of that, we passed away in the desert. We didn't have the Ruach Chaim. We didn't have this life force of godliness. That's the northern wind. This was the northern wind that blew on the harp of David. So this northern wind, which constantly allowed David to wake up and to achieve real God consciousness, this northern wind was completely missing in the generation of the desert. And therefore, even while they're alive, they're called dead. Meaning that this generation of the desert, it wasn't just that when they passed away in the desert as a result of us crying, not for spiritual reasons, but for lackings physically, that as a result of that we were called dead even when we were alive, because we're not conscious. Just like a person that if he's Has v'shalom, he's in a vegetative state, he's in a coma. So too, in some ways, most people who are close to him would say he appears to be more dead than alive, because a person, their life force is their mochin, is their consciousness. So too, the Jewish people in the desert, or us now in this final generation, that we don't have real closeness to Hashem, that we either don't even know he exists, or we don't feel close to him even though we want to be close to him. And for this reason, there's a lot of reason to be mourning right now. So this is a type of death. This is a type of mating, of dying. And the merchant was trying to show Rabbi Baruch Hana, where are these people drawing their wholeness in the place of their lack? How are they able to maintain their life? How are they able to continue living even though they're spiritually dead, even though they're not conscious? How are they able to find wholeness in a place of lack? How are we able to draw down energy and life force into our lackings, even though we still feel so lacking? Dainu damo keep vasme, because they appear to be like drunkards. And what does the Rabbeinu Shmuel say? Kishtu yayin, like people who drank too much wine. Rabbi Nachman says, Bechinat Esav, Hadmoni. This is the concept of Esav, meaning it's alluding to the fact, what does it mean to drink too much wine? It means that we're drawing in our life force from Esav, that we know that according to Kabbalah, red represents din or judgments, and that all din and judgments is sourced in the left side, Kabbalistically. That left side is the side of Esav. That as opposed to Yaakov, who represents spirituality, who represents this intense closeness and connection to Hashem, and the simplicity and this humility, this innocence almost, that he was an Ish Tam. Esav represents the hairy man. He represents the man who's red. He represents the man of physicality, the one who is trying to fill in all of his lackings with physicality, even though it's not working, because he despises spirituality, because he doesn't realize the value of spirituality. So where are all the people in our generation, or the people in the generation of the desert, receiving their life force from, if they're not getting it from the tzaddik, who Rabbi Nachman says is the source of all life force? It's because they're getting it from the backside. They're getting it from Esav, that he is the red man, meaning the wine that they were drinking in the desert. Harav the Klipa. He's the Rav of the other side. He's not the Rav who gives us Kedusha. He's not the Rav of Chesed. He's the Rav of Sina, of hatred, that when we receive from him is the life force of the Sitra Achra, which distances us from Hashem, which causes our lackings to feel even more intense. Just like when you fill it with physicality, you don't feel those lackings that they go away. You actually feel more of an intense craving the more you engage with physicality. It's from there that the Rishayim get their Ruach Chaim. It's from there that those people who are disconnected from Hashem, that's where they get their Ruach of life from. Vaganu aparkid, and they were laying down flat on their back. Perush Rabbeinu Shmuel, Pneim Lamala. Rabbeinu Shmuel comes and adds that their faces were looking upwards. Pneihem, Zebechinat Ruach. And Rabbi Nachman says, why does Rabbeinu Shmuel have to tell us that their faces were looking upwards? Because face is the concept of Ruach. Ba'einu Lamala. This is the meaning of upwards. Ki Ruach Shalahem Gedola Lafi Sha'ad Asher Ola Hatzlachatam Lamala. Because at the moment their Ruach is mighty, meaning those people who are not connected to Hashem and they have a deep influence in the world, their Ruach right now is very strong because their fortune is ascendant. Like the Pasuk teaches us in Tehillim, Kol Tzarav Yafiach Behem. He blows away all of his enemies. This is the reason why there's a Ruach in the world right now that's of atheism, that's of godlessness. And where is that Ruach coming from? How is it able to be so strong right now that we don't even feel God in our life? We don't even feel Hashem in our life. The majority of people have never even heard of Hashem. So how is that possible? Where is that Ruach coming from? It's coming from the fact that they're drawing Ruach from the Rav, the Klipa. And as a result of that, even though they're drunk and even though they're unconscious, their faces are upwards, meaning they're ascendant right now, because they're getting their Ruach from this Ruach Sarah, this storm wind, which even though it has no lasting quality to it, at the same time, it's very strong in its time. V'hava zekifa birkei dahad minayu. One of them had their knee raised up. Zemora al godel hatzlacha shel harashayim. This is alluding to the great good fortune of those people who are actually not close to Hashem, right? A lot of people have the question, why do good things happen to bad people? Why do bad things happen to good people? We know according to the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, this is one of the questions that Moshe Rabbeinu had for Hashem. And one of the questions in which we can't have it answered to until Mashiach comes. And at the same time, we're getting some type of understanding now of why good things happen, so to speak, to people who are not doing the right thing, who are not trying to be close to spirituality, who are not trying to grow closer to Hashem. And the reason is because their ruach they're getting is like a storm wind, that even though it fades away over time, just like the nations of the world who have come up and fought against the Jewish people, that they have conquered, like the Romans and the Greeks and the Assyrians and the Germans and the Italians and the Spanish and the Mitzrayim and the list goes on and on and on. At the same time, they faded away, and the Jewish people, that we have never had that type of strength, so to speak, that at least overtly or externally, we have never, so to speak, conquered the world. At the same time, we know that the entire reason for the existence of the world is in merit of the Jewish people, but it's hidden, it's undercover right now while we're in exile. But it's the power of these nations that they're drawing from the Ruach Sarah, they're drawing from the life force of Esav, that it's strong in its time, but it fades away. So this is part of the reason why they experience, so to speak, good. It's because they have a peak of time in which they do have a Ruach, in which they do have a strength, a Koach. And the merchant went under his knee. Hainu etzadik shenikre taya. like Rabbi Nachman constantly refers to this merchant in his stories of Rabbi Bar Chana, that the merchant is like the tzaddik. Kamosha Perush Rabbeinu Shmuel Bechul Makom, like Rabbeinu Shmuel always teaches us, Socher Yishmael, that it's always a reference to the Yishmaelite, that he's a Yishmaelite trader. And what's the concept of the Yishmaelite Socher, the trader? It's the tzaddik. V'socher hu bechinat ruach, because the concept of Socher, or trader, is the concept of ruach. Like the pasuk says, Sovev Sovev Holecha Ruach, that the ruach, the life force, goes round and round, meaning the concept of the tzaddik is that he draws down ruach into the world. I know a tzaddik shemikabel ruach the kedusha, just like the tzaddik of the generation, he draws ruach from the water. He draws ruach from the Torah. He's the ruach of Elokim. He is the spirit of godliness, which is drawing down life force from above the water. So he is like this Yishmaelite trader. Al Shem, like it says about Yishmael, Ki Shema Hashem El Anyech, that Hashem hears his pain, that Hashem hears his complaint, just like it says that in the Gemara, that Hashem hears the prayers of the tzaddikim in a very intense way, that he answers all their prayers. Ki tzaddik shomea kol ha'anachot shel davekim bo, because in this case, the tzaddik is like Hashem in the sense that the tzaddik hears the sighs of all those who are attached to him. And in all of the sighs, Rabbi Nachman teaches that when we are close to the tzaddik of the generation, then when we sigh or when we kvetch or when we go out to do ibodedut and we cry out to Hashem about those things that we're lacking, that intensity of loneliness that we all feel. So then as a result of that, we actually draw life force from the tzaddik of the generation. Because just like Yishmael, Hashem heard his complaints, which unfortunately for us is the reason why still to this day we suffer from them, because Hashem is still hearing them because of that promise that he made to Yishmael and to his mother. At the same time, we're learning that the tzaddik has that same koach, that Hashem constantly hears the pain of the tzaddik, and therefore all those people who are attached to the tzaddik in truth, then the tzaddik hears those sighs and he draws ruach into those lackings. And it said that he was riding on that camel under his knee. And the concept of gamal, camel, also comes from the shorish of the word gomel, which means that he does good to his soul. He's an ish chesed. This is an aspect of the tzaddik. That what does it mean he's riding on the camel? The tzaddik's riding on the camel. It's alluding to the fact that he is a gomel nafsho. He does good to the neshama. He's an ish chesed. He's a man of love. He's a man of kindness. That is opposed to the Rav de Klipa. This is the Rav Chesed that we refer to in the 13 attributes of Rachamim. That's the tzaddik. What does it mean? Uskif rumcha, that he was holding up his spear. Romem hu bechinat ruach mem. That the concept of the spear is the concept of ruach mem. Because Rav Nachman is bringing a teaching from the Zohar, which actually comes from this parsha now of Pinchas. That is, that we know that Pinchas ended up killing a person who was causing a lot of damage to the Jewish people. Now, on paper, even though it looked like he might have done the wrong thing, we know that Hashem actually felt that this was the most noble thing and the most selfless thing that a person could do. As a result of that, he was blessed with peace. We know that Pinchas, according to the Zohar, reincarnates, like we spoke about reincarnation before. Pinchas becomes Eliyahu a Navi, and we know that Eliyahu Navi again is going to come and announce the coming of Mashiach, and this is what it means, that he is the Brit Shalom, he is the Brit of peace, that peace is with him. He's going to announce peace in the world because he's going to announce the coming of Mashiach. And all that came from his romech, his spear with which he killed Zimri. And the Zohar says, what was that spear which he killed Zimri with? So he readied his weapon, the Zohar said, his weapon of tefillah and Torah. Where do we see that Torah and tefillah is alluded to by the romech, by the spear? Because if you flip the letters around, it's ruach mem. That this ruach, that Pinchas had the ruach of the tzaddik. And where did it come from? It came from his attachment to the mem, that was Moshe Rabbeinu. That he was so connected to Moshe Rabbeinu that he even knew the halacha when Moshe, so to speak, didn't. And he was able to guard the Brit for the Klal Yisrael, for the Jewish people. So that's the concept of romech, that he had a spear, meaning that he had the ruach of the tzaddik, that he was hovering over the water, which is the concept of mem. And we know Moshe Rabbeinu is the concept of the water itself, because it says about Moshe, his name is called Moshe because he is drawn out of the water. He's constantly hovering over the water. So anybody who's attached to him has this Ruach Elokim, Merachefet Apnei Hamayim. He has this Ruach of Hashem, which is hovering over the water. Also, just a beautiful point to note that this pasuk alludes to a very deep Kabbalistic concept that all the lacking in the world comes from this 288 sparks of godliness, which fell at the time of creation with what is called the breaking of the vessels. We're not going to go into everything, but suffice it to say that there was an initial breaking of creation, which was purposeful, but was also very damaging. And the purpose of it was that we should be able to then lift up those things that are broken. That was the work which Hashem gave us to do, to be co-creators of creation, to lift up those things that are broken, which is very beautiful and very empowering. And those sparks, where are they alluded to in the Torah? Do we see these 288 sparks spoken about in Maseh Bereshit? So we do, because the word marchefet comes from the root rachef, and the gematria of this word is 288. And the reason that this specifically word is used when it's not often used is to allude to, says the Zohar, these 288 sparks of godliness which fell at the time of creation and which the Jewish people have been charged to lift up and to elevate. And each of us personally, those lackings that we have in our life, they come from those 288 sparks. So where can we find that the uplifting of those sparks? From the Ruach of Elokim that's marchefet over the water. From the Ruach of Elokim, meaning the tzaddik, that he's hovering over the Torah, because he has the veku with the Torah at all times, with the mem, with Moshe. So as a result of that, when we are attached to him, we draw down this Ruach from the tzaddik and fill in all of those lackings within us. And this is all alluded to as well by the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu received the Torah and it took him 40 days. Because 40 always alludes to the mem, it alludes to the water, it alludes to the Torah. Sheshama Ruach Chaim, that there is the Ruach of life, there's the true energy and life force of existence. Klomar, meaning that the tzaddik is drawing down the Ruach of Elokim from the water, meaning that this whole entire episode in the beginning of creation, when the world went into tohu vavohu, when the world went into chaos, not unlike our generation now, that we all feel this tremendous state of chaos and lacking and breaking. But to give us hope, the next part of the Torah is that, but there's a Ruach of Elokim that's hovering over the water, meaning there's a tzaddik of the generation that he is really truly attached to the Torah, meaning attached to Hashem. And if we are able to connect to him, then Yehi Or, there's going to be light in your life. V'im kol zeh nachit tachot birkei. Even so, he came under his knee, tachat atzlachat harasha, meaning that when a person is not a whole tzaddik, where he's not completely attached to this tzaddik of the generation, so then as a result of that, then the rasha, the one who's disconnected from Hashem, is even greater than him. 1 second. It's not the easiest thing to teach at 4:00 in the morning. Second. Okay, so he cuts off a corner from the tzitzit. Hainu shepasak v'shaber hamida ra'a me'achad me'arba yisodot she'yir v'yimshich harasha al atzmo. In other words, he separated and he broke this bad trait in one of the four elements that he had. And he draw negativity on himself because the Russia had empowered and drawn upon himself this ruach, the klipa. I cut off a corner from tzitzit, meaning he separated one of their tzitzit. This is the aspect of separating and breaking out one of the bad character traits, one of their conduits. Like we learned before, that where our lacking is coming from, it's coming from one of the four letters of Hashem's name, whether it's anger or jealousy that comes from the highest letter of Hashem's name, the Yud, or it comes from Devarim Batalim, negative speech, which comes from the Hey of Hashem's name, or whether it comes from our physical lusts and desires, which come from the Vav of Hashem's name, or it comes from the sadness or lower fear, lethargy. So all of these things come from the final Hey of Hashem's name. So these are alluded to by the four corners of the tzitzit, that they're like the tikkun, the rectification for the four letters of Hashem's name. Because all bad character traits come from these four elements, the root of which is actually the four tzitzit, which is only good. So we were not able to leave. Why not? Because even though he separated the tzitzit, he was not able to actually overcome the negativity that came from this person under his knee. Because even though he had separated and broken this person's bad trait, whose root is in the tzitzit, and he was able to cut off the tzitzit from one of them, he was still unable to subdue him and move out from under his knee. That's why they could not depart from there. Meaning to say that for us, as long as we're not completely whole spiritually, the negativity always has a pull on us. It always is able to get inside of us. It's always able to affect us and to bring us down, because there's some type of conduit. That lacking that we have is the space in which he manifests, the ruach of klipa, the ruach of negativity. So the merchant asked me, did you perhaps take something from them? In other words, maybe you still have one of these four negative character traits and you weren't able to completely mitaken it, to completely rectify it. This is why we're not able to leave the desert. Because as long as a person has one of these traits and it still has even the slightest hold on him, he can't subdue the negativity of people and he can't subdue the negativity within himself. Thus, when he said, did you perhaps take something from them? He means, do you still have attachment to these things that are bringing you down, that are causing you to struggle? Whether it's issues with the Brit Milah, whether it's attachment to secular wisdom, whether it is hanging out with bad influences, whether it is addiction or abuse of substances, whether it is chaotic relationships. So whatever is this thing which is causing us to be stuck in this brokenness and this lacking, that's the reason why we're not able to leave this desert behind. That's the reason why we're not able to leave our exile behind. So he says we have a tradition that anyone who takes something from them cannot depart, meaning for whatever reason that those people passed away in the desert, which according to the Rizal were those people, so we cannot remain with those things that we struggled with then if we want to leave now. So we can't remain with any of those same taivot or any of those same negative character traits that they still had then, or otherwise we're not going to be able to leave the desert as well. So I went back and I put his tzitzi corner back. That is, I returned whatever little bit of negativity which I had gotten from him, and I separated it from me. And then we were able to leave. That is, we were successful in emerging from under his knee to subdue and humble the person who was far from him. The perfect tzaddik is the only one who's capable of entirely removing himself from any attachment to negativity. So even though we may not be at that level or any close to that level, it's fine, because we're not necessarily made for that. But we do have to do our best to have attachment to the tzaddik who is capable of that, who has accomplished that, that person who is able to divest himself of physicality or excessiveness, to divest himself from the imaginations and the lackings of this world, and to draw complete devekut and closeness with Hashem, like the greatest tzaddikim in history were capable of. So we either need to be that person, or we need to attach ourselves to that person. And then when we do that, even if we have those lackings, we're still able to draw down the ruach of Chaim from the tzaddik, and we're able to even provoke those lackings and work with them and attack those lackings and fill them in. Now we're going to finish the lesson based on the original pasuk of the Torah, and then Bezrat Hashem, if you guys have any questions, we'll bring the whole lesson together. So it began with a pasuk from Tehillim. Sorry, a pasuk about Zerubbabel. So he had the menorah. So he says like this: V'ra'iti v'yinei menorah zahav. Behold, I saw a gold menorah. Hiya Torah. So Rabbi Nachman teaches something which is brought down many times in Chassidut, and by all sages actually, that the menorah represents the Torah, and that's the reason why it was in the south of the Beit HaMikdash, and that's why it says whenever you want wisdom, pray to the south, because that's the place of the menorah, that's the place of the Torah. HaNechamadim is Ahav. This is the Torah which is more desired than gold. Like David HaMelech teaches us that it's Nechamadim is Ahav, like we say in Tehillim every Shabbat, that the Torah is more desired than gold. So this is the menorah that he's speaking about. V'shivo neroteha. The gula al rosha. It has a bowl on its top. Perush Rashi. Rashi says, what does it mean that there is a bowl on its top? It means a mayan, a wellspring. Hu mayan yotze mi beit Hashem. Hu tefillah. Meaning, where are all these 7 rungs of the menorah coming from? Where are all these revelations, these 70 faces of the Torah rooted in? They're all coming from the bowl on top of the menorah, on top of the middle shaft of the menorah, which is our tefillah. Like Rabbi Nachman teaches, where does the garden come from? It comes from Eden, and Eden is tefillah, meaning that when the Jewish people are engaged in heartfelt tefillah, that gives birth to revelations in Torah. It's not the opposite. That's why the Gemara says that tefillah stands at the summit of existence. So where's Torah? It must be beneath it. But how could the Torah be beneath tefillah? How could it be beneath prayer? Because prayer is what gives birth to Torah. So to speak, tefillah is the womb which gives birth to the child that's called da'at, that's called Torah. So what's the bowl on top of the menorah, meaning on top of the Torah? It's the mayan, it's the fountain that's called tefillah, where the Torah comes out from. And that's the 7 lamps, meaning these are all the neshamot, these are all the souls of the Jewish people that are growing in the garden, meaning that are coming from the Torah, because we know that the souls of the Jewish people are actually a revelation of the 600,000 letters in the Torah, just like there's 600,000 Jewish souls, like you're going to see in the census in this week's Parsha and last week's Parsha, that Moshe Rabbeinu took 600,000 souls towards the end of his life, because we represent the 600,000 letters that are in the Torah. And the 7 pipes to these 7 lamps, Shiva Veshiva Mutzakot, they are the concept of the 49 lights. Shu Ura Ganuz Latir. That's the concept of the light of creation that's hidden away from the future. Meaning each of these 7 lights has 7 lights of its own. This is corresponding to the Sfirot, that is Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. And each of the 7 lights, those 7 Sfirot, have those 7 Sfirot in it, subcategories of it. So 7 times 7 is 49. So what are these 49 corresponding to? These 49 lights are corresponding to the light of creation that's hidden away. We know that Adam Rishon had those lights shining for him for 49 hours, and is alluded to by the amount of lights that we light on Hanukkah as well. So too for us in the future, that when Mashiach comes, those 49 lights are going to be revealed in total, and that's the light that was actually hidden away for creation. That's the light of Eden, that it says Lo Ra'ata, no eye has seen this light, meaning it's the greatness of tefillah, of prayer. We know that when Mashiach comes, Rabbi Nachman says that he is going to overcome it, all of his challenges. He's going to rise above all the difficulties in his life through tefillah, through prayer. What's the reason? Because prayer actually is the light of creation from before existence. This is the light of Mashiach, and that's actually the deeper reason why Rav Chaim Vital says in the final generation, even though we're so far from the revelation of Har Sinai, the revelation of Torah, we're closer to the light of Mashiach. So what's the light of Mashiach? It's the light of tefillah. So Rav Chaim Vital says that the avoda of the final generation, the main avoda will not be the learning of Torah, but it will be the heartfelt tefillah of the Jewish people. And there are two olives near this menorah, this gold menorah. Shnayim zeitim alei, Perush Rashi, Shnei ilanot, two trees, meaning ilana dechaya ve'ilana demota. That is the tree of life and the tree of death, meaning the tree of da'ata tovara. So what are these two olives near it? Meaning these two olive trees. We know according to the Zohar that there's the Eitz Chaim, that's the tree of life, that's the Torah. And the Zohar also says that's the tzaddik. Elsewhere, it says that what's the tree of death? In the Zohar, it refers to it as Malchut. But specifically, it's the Malchut, the Sitra Achra that we're worried about. That is people who are not connected to Hashem, that they are not receiving life force from the Rav Chesed. So where are they getting it from? They're getting it from the Rav, the Klipa. That's the tree of Da'at, of Tovara. That's the tree that Hashem told Adam and Chava not to eat from. Don't eat from that tree, because on the day you eat from it, you're going to pass away. And they didn't pass away. So what does it mean that they're going to die? The answer is that death is not just physical, because it says about people who are not tzaddikim that they're dead even when they're alive. And we in our generation know this more than anybody, that when you're not connected to Hashem, when you don't have amunah, when you don't have da'at, when you don't feel clarity in our life, when you don't have real spiritual connection or fulfillment, you feel lacking. You feel a type of death. So this was the real essence of the death that was prescribed to Adam and Chava after they ate from that tree, meaning that whenever you're drawing from the Rav, the Klipa, you're gonna have lackings in your life that are very intense, that are not able to be filled. One tree to the right and one to the left. And this is the concept of from there it separates, meaning there's a river that goes out of Eden and it waters the garden, one to the right and one to the left. The tree of life waters to the right, meaning the side of spirituality, and the tree of Da'at Tovara, knowledge of good and bad, that's the tree of physicality, that's going to water out to the left, the side of Klipa. And that's why it said, V'amar ela malach ma'aleh. I said to the malach, the angel who spoke with me, Ma'ele, what are these? Lo b'chayo v'lo v'choach ki'im baruchi. This is the word of Hashem to Zerubbabel, not by might, not by power, but by my ruach. Meaning that a person is not going to be able to overcome the challenges in his life, and the Jewish people are not going to be able to get out of exile through some type of tremendous chokhmah, wisdom, or some type of tremendous koach, but only by ruach. That ruach is the key to geula. Ruach is the key to ending the exile. Like Rabbi Nachman said to his students, when people ask you, what did you get in Breslov? Tell them you got ruach. Ruach. Tell them that you got life force. Now we can understand what did Rabbi Nachman mean by that. It's a seemingly innocuous statement to say that all of my students, what are you going to get from me? You're going to get ruach. So what? You're going to get life force. You're going to get energy. So we learn here, this is the ikr of everything. This is the ruach of Elokim that's hovering over the water, that if you're in Breslov and you have the fire of Rabbi Nachman burning inside of you, so then you have the ruach of Elokim that's hovering over the water, and then all of your lackings are filled in. This is because by means of Torah and Tefillah, by means of which the good is extracted from the negativity, meaning how did we say in this lesson that you're able to extract the good from the bad? So we said that you can only do this through Torah and Tefillah, through Gan and Eden. Gan being Torah, Eden being Tefillah, and by attachment to the tzaddik, who is the ruach of life, and draws that ruach into you in all of those places of lacking, and it becomes wholeness. Because Zerubbabel represented the tzaddik of the generation. He encountered opposition from a number of people who wanted to prevent him from serving Hashem. He was the one who wanted to build the Beit HaMikdash again. This is explained in a number of pasukim. But he says, not by might, not by power, but by my ruach. Meaning, through Hashem, he's able to do this. The ruach of life, this perfect tzaddik, and in this case, it's Zerubbabel, it's a hard name to say. He is able to overcome all of his enemies, and they were all subdued and humbled, and he was able to be successful. So for just a very quick summary of what we learned in this lesson, and then Bezrat Hashem, in our next lesson, we're going to start Torah 9, which is an amazing lesson on tefillah, a very powerful lesson on prayer. We'll just do a quick summary here. Rabbi Nachman says that all lackings that we have do not come from genetics. They don't come from physical lackings or deficiencies. They're not coming from psychological deficiencies, even though they might appear to be. all of lackings come from a lack of life force. Wherever you find a lack of life force, there you're going to find lacking. So Rabbi Nachman says, where do we find life force? We find it in the tzaddik of the generation. So where do all these people, including ourselves, that we're not attached to the tzaddik, where do we get our life force from? So we must be getting it from some type of rav, some type of tzaddik, but we're getting it from the rav of the klipa, the rav of the sitra achra. Instead of getting from the Eitz Chaim, instead of getting from the tree of life, we're receiving it from the tree of Da'at Tov Ra, the same tree that Adam initially passed away from. And that's the reason why we still are considered, so to speak, dead, even now while we're alive. Not to sound too morbid, but a person who's not conscious, a person who doesn't really understand the source and the root of the events in his life, he doesn't have any connection to the source of reality, to Hashem, so he doesn't have real life. So these are like the people in the desert. How do we get out of this desert? We need to make sure that our tzitzit are whole, that they're complete. And the Zohar teaches, and Rabbi Nachman teaches, what are the concepts of tzitzit? They're the concept of the tzaddik, that by krechsing, by moaning, by sighing, and having attachment to the tzaddik, by learning his Torah, by fulfilling his advice and directives, by going to visit him in Uman for Rosh Hashanah, Bezrat Hashem, this year. So as a result of that, we are going to have attachment to the tzaddik. We're going to have clinging to the tzaddik, and we're going to be able to fill in those lackings in our life. And how do we increase our attachment to the tzaddik? We do it through Torah and Tefillah, meaning by every single day having a time that we do Hibodedut, that we talk to Hashem, which is fulfilling the advice of Rabbi Nachman, that by every single day that we have a time that we learn the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, even if it's only a little bit. This is also fulfilling the advice of Rabbi Nachman, and as well, this is the main type of Torah learning, which separates good from the bad, Rabbi Nachman teaches. And by engaging in these acts of Torah and Tefillah, we're able to slowly every day lift out the good and extract it from the bad, and at the same time attach ourselves to the tzaddik who encouraged us to engage in these practices. And Bezrat Hashem, like Rabbi Nachman said 200 years ago, that what are you going to get by learning my teachings? What are you going to get by being in Breslov, which we don't have Breslov right now the same way that we did then. But so to speak, when we're learning Rabbi Nachman's teachings, we're in Breslov with Rabbeinu. So we're getting Ruach. So Bezrat Hashem, we should all have Ruach that comes from Hashem in the deepest possible way. We should be able to fill in all of those lackings in our life. And the main lacking that we have is a lack of Amunah. There's a lacking of Da'at. Bezrat Hashem, that the Ruach of Elokim should come hovering over the water and saturate the whole world. That's the Ruach of the Mashiach Tzidkenu, that it should come and bring rectification to the world and Geula. And Bezrat Hashem, it should be in all of our merit that this takes place. Does anybody have any questions from today's lesson? No? Okay. Everybody have an amazing, amazing night, an amazing day. Bezrat Hashem, next time you see me, hopefully tomorrow morning, we'll be starting Torah 9, Likutei Moharan. Please be there. Please tell your friends and family. We have to get this light out to more and more people. Okay? Baruch Hashem, Tzion is having a lot of success. I think we have almost like 235 subscribers now on YouTube. Our last video that we did in Beersheba has like 250 views, which is amazing. So we have to keep getting this light out to more and more people and help other people while we're trying to help ourselves. And Bezrat Hashem, to end this exile. Also as well, we have a fundraiser coming up, which is very vital and very important to us. That's going to help us to achieve a lot of the things that we want to this upcoming year. So please, anybody who has not offered to help out with that, please reach out to Benjamin Weinberg, our CEO, COO of Tzion Bresla Project at tzionbreslaproject@gmail.com, or text us or call us and see how you can help us with the fundraiser. It doesn't even have to be with any financial contribution. You could simply make a phone call. That would help us. Every little bit helps. It's a huge contribution. It's the highest level of tzedakah. And Bezrat Hashem, and all of your merits, we're going to be able to continue making lessons like this, but even more powerful and even greater, and reaching out to more and more people as time goes on with Hashem's help. Please, everybody have an amazing, amazing day.